We'll call to order the planning commission meeting, regular meeting for February 20th, 2025. Welcome, everyone, and I'll ask for roll call.
Baldwin.
Here.
Patrick.
Here.
Clark.
Here.
Connor.
Here.
Lachey.
Here.
Marino.
Here.
And Mann.
Here. Very good. Next on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. So moved. So moved. Second. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Opposed? Seeing none, agenda is approved. In the packet was the minutes from the January 16th meeting. I was not present in it, so I read through them, but does anybody have any comments or changes that they'd like to make or
They just
propose?
They need to reflect that I was at the meeting. Other than that,
I'm so sorry.
Oh, yes. Missed that.
otherwise, good. You cut states from the previous.
We too.
And do we have a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve minutes for the meeting on January 16th. Support.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Minutes have been approved. Moving on to agenda item 4, public comments on the agenda items. At this time, anybody who is in the room or online, you can just raise your hand or come up to the microphone. Let us know that you would like to speak. State your name, your address. Your comments would be limited to 3 minutes. And if you would, please let us know what agenda item it is that you're wanting to address. Public comments of anyone in the room? Seeing none. Anyone online? Seeing none. That will close public comments. Moving on to old business. First item underneath old business, really the first 3, and Luke can kind of also explain, are the 3 outstanding ADU proposals that we have had that we have postponed each month. On each of them, we've done a motion each month to postpone to the following one, all waiting for the ADU ordinance to be passed by or recommended by us and then passed by city council, which occurred at the last city council meeting. And Luke, I believe that was posted last Thursday.
Actually, I believe it was posted today and it'll be effective as of next Thursday. So we'll postpone it for 1 more month and then we're actually able to approve them at that meeting.
Right. So we weren't able to move them. So at this point, I think all we have to do is just bring it up and ask for a motion.
I think we need a motion to postpone
Right.
for each of them.
So on the first one, the 450 Spear Street,
Chairman, I'll make a motion that we delay approval of, is it 450 Spear?
postpone it for 1 more month.
For 1 more month, yes.
And that would be the March 20th,
Yes,
2025 meeting.
that's it.
Do we have a second?
Second.
I have a question. When we consider on March 20th, do we need a public hearing for each of these items as well, or is it, we've already done the public hearing?
We've already done the public hearing, so
Thank
we've
you.
just, yep.
I didn't know if we'd also continued the public hearing. Thank you.
I think we could still have public comment about it. If there are new people in the audience that want to talk about it further, it's appropriate to have them come up, but we have no requirement.
Thank you.
On that motion, guessing it's a roll call for the postponement?
Yeah.
Might as well.
We'll do roll. Patrick.
Yes.
Baldwin.
Yes.
Clark.
Yes.
Connor.
Yes.
Lachey.
Yes.
Marino.
Yes.
And Mann.
Yes. Item B, the 515 St. Joseph, same situation.
Like to make a motion for 515 St. Joseph to postpone till the March 20th meeting?
Second.
Second, roll call, please.
Patrick.
Yes.
Baldwin.
Yes.
Clark.
Yes.
Connor.
Yes.
Lachey.
Yes.
Marino.
Yes.
And Mann.
Yes. Item C, 306 Mary Street, same situation regarding their application.
I make a motion to postpone the 306 Mary Street special land use request to the March 20th meeting.
Support?
Support.
Doesn't
Roll
matter.
call.
Patrick,
Yes.
Paulson,
Yes.
Clark,
Yes.
Goddard,
Yes.
Lachey,
Here, yes.
Kavanaugh,
Yes.
and Mayor.
Yes.
Great.
Maybe we should have had that as a consent agenda.
Yeah.
Just put them all three together. Moving on then to the item that we have also postponed and moved from month to month, which is the bed and breakfast accessory structure in the R4 City Center Transitional Residential District. In our packet was a review of the draft code ordinances amendment, and as well as this is a continuation now of the public hearing that we had previously. And during that previous public hearing, we already had all the public comments and that, but we will ask once again for Luke to kind of give us an update and then for the applicant's representative to be able to speak.
Sure. Yeah, we are here again to discuss the zoning ordinance amendment proposal to allow for accessory guest buildings or guest structures. And Chris Corey is here with us once again to discuss the proposal. Obviously, this has been on the agenda since November. We've had a lot of back and forth and a lot of changes, a lot of discussion, and hopefully the memo has cleared up some questions. I know we've had a lot of questions about states regulations and just how those are incorporated into this whole thing. So if you got any questions, we can sort of go around and address those and see what you guys think.
Did you have?
I'll only briefly, happy to be back again. Chris Corey from McKenna on behalf of Wickwood Inn. I will note in the revised version of the proposed amendment that Mr. Drusik has provided, there are now caps of various types that was discussed previously. Those caps, as you'll note, are 2 accessory guest buildings per principal building, 3 guest rooms per accessory building, and in terms of total accessory guest rooms, no more than 50% or 6, whichever is less. So I do have from Wickwood folks, they are in favor of all of those. Those are acceptable to Wickwood Inn.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thoughts and comments on what we now have in front of us?
I have a question.
Questions for them?
Where did the 2 structures and the 3 rooms per structure framework, how did that evolve? How did we get to where we are with that? I'm just curious if there's any
I think-
substantial.
During the discussions that happened back in December and what I recall that occurred even last month, the idea was how would we try to limit the potential of somebody buying neighboring properties and all of a sudden having 4 or 5 accessory guests underneath one principal. And so what I recall was the discussion that maybe we should try to limit it. And it was a question of, do you limit it at 1 or 2 accessory guest dwellings? And it appeared that when we were looking at the report, when they looked at all 32 lots that was within the R4, there's only several that would even allow up to 2 because of lot coverage and limitations. So the idea of having a 2 versus 1 was that it fit within the framework and the nature of the transitional unit. It provided the potential of more tourist rooms, which would help with the offset if we did see a number of homes have to no longer have short-term rental. At least that's how I interpreted it, as to how it came up to the 2 versus the 1. The 3 units, no more than 3 rooms, I think it had more to do with like the size limit that you'd want to keep them to. Thinking that if a structure was in that 600 square foot range, that if you tried to do any more than 3 rooms, they'd be almost too small. So that's how, I mean, again, I don't think it was ever something where anyone said, hey, it needs to be 2 and 3. It was what was proposed. And then as I've been able to look at it, it seems to make sense and work for not only the applicant, but also for anyone else that was in that area if they wanted to do something similar.
And to some degree, it's a private proposal. It's an outside company proposing the ordinance amendment. So obviously, it's to fit their needs as well as the rest of the district. So
I understand that. Yeah. Okay. And I apologize if I somehow skimmed over the discussion that we had, but I just
Alright.
keep going back and forth with, is 2 and 3 the right number, or is 1 and 4 or 5, the right number? Because we have some parcels that can't have 2.
Correct. But then if it had a
and would
one
benefit-
with 4
would
or
benefit
5,
More by
we
having
would have-
larger ADU than the one, sorry, I just
Correct, I'm
want to
sorry.
finish.
Yep.
Would benefit from having a larger single ADU than would a property that can accommodate 2. You understand where I'm going? So I was just looking at, part of me was looking at it in a sense of fairness. The properties that already have a lot of lot coverage, and I don't know if that's within our purview or not, or whether it should even be going down that thought process, but I just wanted to kind of throw it out there that was just something that was,
sure.
tickling the back of my head. Sorry.
No, I think it's worthy of a discussion. And in my mind, and again, I'm open to hearing everyone else, if you had one and you were allowing potentially 4 or 5 rooms to be part of it, you're really building now almost like another primary, type of structure. Whereas, at what point does it become too large?
Yep.
And all of a sudden.
That
it
was
doesn't fit
that was
in
my
neighborhood.
thought. Doesn't become mega structures next to each other. It's kept small and it won't proliferate as much by having some of that limitation, which was their concern of it taking over a block somewhere.
Well, I think regardless, whether it's 1 or 2, we're not taking over a block, right?
right.
That's
That's true.
off the table.
But as I read it, all the buildings have to be on the same property, is that right?
Correct.
So is the intention that 510 Butler and 120 Mary are gonna merge? Isn't 120 Mary the?
The idea is if that's potential down the road, and what I've been trying over the last month or so, I've started to realizing that as a planning commission, we really want to look at this. Does this make sense for the city of Saugatuck within the R4 district? And whether it's the applicant who, yes, they brought it to us, but if there was anyone else, does this meet the master plan? Does this satisfy some of the objectives that we have identified, like increasing the number of places for tourist and, transient short-term stays? And less about what would happen with the applicant in their next steps. Like whether or not the applicant can still be a bed and breakfast, or whether or not the applicant would be called a hotel, or whether they want to merge properties at some point. That is kind of secondary to, is this something that would work for the benefit of the city within the R4 district? And when I look at that, knowing that it is a transitional district, that it is a district that, even like the master plan and the zoning says, that should be somewhat in flux and have some flexibility over time. This seems to be a reasonable, proposal now that we've had kind of time to look at it and that we've been able to put some limits on it. And I think the other thing that I liked in this is the 50%. So if I had another home that was within the district that could only, if they wanted to turn it into a bed and breakfast, it could be converted into 6 rooms. And they wanted to actually do accessory dwelling unit. The total number of rooms that could be, not dwelling, accessory guest unit, the total number of rooms that they could have would be 3, because it can't go over 50% of what's in the principal building. So I think that kind of stays with the character. If you've got a larger one, like in this situation, the applicant, then yes, they could actually, their 50% could be more than the 6, so kind of limited at 6, it would seem to be fair on all sides when we looked at it from the city standpoint and from anybody who would be concerned about crowds or parking or congestion with that type of structure. He said that's kind of where I'm now standing. And Austin, I think you were one who originally kind of talked about the idea of putting a limit, on the numbers, if I recall.
Yeah, just trying to cabin it a little bit. And that's why I think it's important if we just communicate. I do think, like Luke was saying, it is important to acknowledge that, yes, this is something that the R4 can accommodate as this transitional zone, but one that still should be kind of more residential. But I do think we need to acknowledge that we're kind of working on this request from Wickwood.
Absolutely.
And I do think city council needs to realize that, just to make sure that we understand the implications and the potential second and third order effects that could come from this, so that we could potentially cabin it in the future if it has a chance to get out of hand.
The other thing that's in here and I can't remember if it was in the original draft, but is the requirement that, they have to come before the planning commission through a special land use. So it's not like just somebody can all of a sudden just say, okay, we're going to do it. They would have to still meet all the requirements and with the special land use itself. And my initial was also concerned about all the other bed and breakfasts that would be potentially allowed, within the city. And one of the things that this does is it limits it to the R4 district. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody who's in R2, where bed and breakfasts are allowed by special land use approval, couldn't come to us and ask for, a similar type of change within their zone. But we're not actually at this time changing the definition of a bed and breakfast
Right.
outside of the R4 zone.
Right. So like with R2, you can apply for a special land use to become a bed and breakfast, but a bed and breakfast is just a use that's allowed by right in the R4, but the special land use comes into play when you want to, have these accessory guest buildings.
Just to be clear, and for you, Steve, like we're changing the definition of bed and breakfast with this.
No.
Right?
No.
Are we
So,
not?
Within the
so if you
R4.
go down to what's been proposed for R4 versus what's existing,
Yeah.
I think on page 12, you can see that the existing, there's an existing bed and breakfast section. And we're revising that to say bed and breakfasts with guest rooms only in the principal building. And so what's approved by right in this district is a bed and breakfast with guest rooms only in a principal building. And what's approved by special land use is bed and breakfast with guest rooms in principal building and in accessory guest buildings. So what we're basically saying is if you want a bed and breakfast, just one building in this district, you can do that. Obviously, there are some zoning considerations and all the normal stuff. But if you want a bed and breakfast, which is a principal building and an accessory, you need a special land use approval from the planning commission.
Okay.
Because if you go back through all of our ordinances, this is where sometimes we get some inconsistencies. A bed and breakfast is a permitted use without a special land use within the R4 district, within Water Street South, and Neighborhood Marina District. So in those three districts, they currently can become a bed and breakfast without having to do a special land use or come before planning. In all the other districts, the city center, the Water Street East, used to be Water Street East, now it's Water Street North, Waterfront, the resort, the R2 Lake, the R3 multi, those are all, they can have a bed and breakfast, but they have to do a special land use, which would then require them to come forward. So we're only changing the definition in here to say if they still want to be a bed and breakfast at R4, they can do it without coming before us. But if they wanted to have accessory guest dwellings, they would need to come before us. Now, down the road, if we wanted to try to clean up some of that, some of these zonings where we do have some inconsistencies, that would be something we would do at that time. And I think that's even what David kind of brought up in his memo, but also in some of our calls, was that if we did want to go back and look at our definition of bed and breakfast and put some limits on number of rooms or how if you wanted to allow accessory guest dwellings, that should be something we should put on our priority agenda for 2025, and we'd have it on a future agenda for us to kind of review across the board, and it would apply to all bed and breakfasts. This one right now is just applying to the R4.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, David.
one quick clarification, in section 1 of the proposed ordinance, there is a slight modification to the existing definition of bed and breakfast establishment, but that's only just to recognize that associated accessory guest buildings allowable under certain circumstances. So the current definition is singular, so it's a residential structure. We're saying again, it's a residential building along with associated guest buildings under certain circumstances. So we're not saying exactly in the definition, we're not saying where it's allowed, but we're saying that in certain circumstances, it may be more than one building. So that's the only change to the actual definition of bed and breakfast.
Okay.
Okay, that raises a question, and I understand what everybody said, but I don't see it. If we change under the definition section, the definition of bed and breakfast, doesn't that apply throughout all of the zones as to either permitted uses or special land use permit uses. For example, and I can't find it right now, but if we're talking about R4 as being a bed and breakfast allowable under, and I'm flipping pages, allowable under a special land use, cannot somebody want a bed and breakfast under a special land use in R4 and then also petition, under our definition, petition for an accessory building at that same time? What prohibits that?
Well, I think the allowable under certain circumstances is what, you know, I allowable under certain circumstances sort of takes away so your point is that we're changing the definition of bed and breakfast. So in the neighborhood marine district, bed and breakfast is approvable by right. So can they just also apply for the accessory guest building? But allowable by certain circumstances is sort of insinuating that you have to be in the R4 district where it says bed and breakfast and their associated guest buildings.
Why don't we say R4? I don't, is that what you're getting at, that the certain circumstances a little vague?
Yeah.
That-
If,
The intent of the definition is. I'm sorry,
sorry.
the intent
Go
of the
ahead,
definition
Dave.
is to, I'm sorry, the intent of the definition is to stay fairly general and not include the land use regulation within the definition itself. So the definition is really just to describe the use and the potential options with the use for the accessory building. And like Luke said, under certain circumstances, that's when you would then be directed to the specific requirements for bed and breakfasts, which specifically say that you're only allowed that accessory guest building in R4 based on this proposal.
That's correct. Thank you, David, because if you look at the draft, you know,
Right.
we're changing the language in that section 1, but then if you go back 3 pages where it's the amendment to zoning ordinance, section 154.025B4.
Where are we?
So this will be on page 3, what's page 3 of the
12.
ordinance, which is, I don't have the page numbers here.
Page 3 of our proposed?
Right.
Okay.
So then if you look at section 4,
Yeah.
which is the amendment to the zoning ordinance, section 154.025.
Okay, got it.
So then
Okay.
here, what we're doing, so for R4, it currently says, and only permitted uses, bed and breakfasts. It's being changed to where it says bed and breakfast with guest rooms only in the principal building. So if it's a bed and breakfast with guest rooms only in the principal building, it's still permitted use in R4. But then we're adding into the R4 bed and breakfast underneath special land use, bed and breakfast with guest rooms in the principal building and in an accessory guest building or buildings. So currently, the other,
I get that. We're within R4. Did I misunderstand that we have other zoning districts that allow bed and breakfast, somebody to come forward to us and say, I want a bed and breakfast in XYZ zoning district
without coming through the,
with
Planning?
under a special land use rather than just a permitted use? I thought that's what you said.
yes, there's only 2 other districts that allow it to be without, as a permitted use. The neighborhood marina and currently Water Street South.
Those are permitted uses.
That it's, bed and breakfast is a permitted use in those zones.
Okay, got it.
Every other zone that
What
allows a
keeps
bed and
those two
breakfast.
districts from somebody coming forward and saying, okay, I want accessory buildings in those 2 districts, the Marina District or? the
Just simply that it's not an approved use in that district. So in
Because of what we're putting in, it only goes in R4.
R4, you can
Got it. Okay.
have B&Bs and by special land use, B&Bs in guest buildings.
Right.
Whereas, you know, the neighborhood marine district, you can have B&Bs. And obviously that might be something that we want to address at a later point. Do we want to include that in the neighborhood marine district? But for now,
Correct.
yeah,
And
it's just R4.
And when I saw that it was available in Water Street South, I said, well, we could possibly address it, but one of the priorities that we said that we wanted to move on to was to look at the commercial zones downtown and knowing that we have these 2 really small zones that was left after the creation of the waterfront preservation. We may end up doing something with them. And obviously, if it was merged in, then it would no longer be within that, even that zone. So it really is the neighborhood marine and the R4 that currently had it as a permitted use in the first place. Good discussion points. I
Hey,
mean, it's-
hey,
so-
Okay, I'm looking out, let's use Marine District, 154.032. It simply says bed and breakfast. Now, I understand that in R4, we changed that listing of permitted use to bed and breakfast with guest rooms only in principal building. But if I were a person and I had something in neighborhood Marine District, let's say, and I have a permitted use for bed and breakfast, and I look at the definition section, and the definition section of bed and breakfast says, along with associated accessory buildings allowable under certain circumstances. So the under certain circumstances,
Well, if we reference the, allow, along with associated accessory guest buildings allowed in R4, we then need to keep on changing that for every future district that we,
I think that's what you need to do.
oh,
I'd agree with that, because I think that's our whole discussion, is we're wanting to limit it to R4. And I think what he's getting at is, I think anyone worth their salt, if they want to open up a bed and breakfast, is going to point to this definition and say, certain circumstances, what the heck is that? And I mean, you can point them to R4 and say, oh, well, this is a certain circumstances, but it's still at best very vague of what those certain circumstances are.
They're contradictory. So if, like Steve was saying, down the road, we want to add the availability of accessory dwellings to either the Marine District or the Water Street South District, when we do that at that time, then we can change the definition of bed and breakfast at that time. But I really think we need, the phrase allowable under certain circumstances is like saying et cetera.
David, do you
and
have
it's
thoughts?
It's a little fix.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree. I think we need to recognize the definition that a bed and breakfast under this new option and proposal is going to be more than one building. So if under the existing definition, we're saying that it's a singular residential structure where we could have up to 3 residential structures under this proposal. So I think that needs to be recognized generally in the definition, which in zoning practice, definitions are fairly general. And then the specificity is within the land use regulation per district and in the specific use requirements. So so just to go through the scenario, first off, the first thing folks are going to look at is the zoning district requirements, and then they'll be referred to the specific use requirements. They're not going to be searching for the definition first, but if they do, the definition, they'd see the certain circumstances, they'd be directed eventually to the specific use requirements. And the first thing under accessory guest buildings says it's only allowable in R4. And that is the circumstance where you can't allow be permitted the accessory guest building, as well as all the other specific use requirements beyond just being located in R4. So I think the definition needs to change to show that a bed and breakfast in certain circumstances may be more than one building, because right now it is in the singular form.
I'm trying to thread the needle here. Instead of circumstances, we said under certain district definition. That would leave it vague, and it could still direct them to each district definition and not just say circumstances.
Other than his desire to keep it vague, I don't know why we need to keep it vague.
So you don't have to change it every time when something changes, because it will
We're
forget.
going to only have to change it when we change
Sure.
what's allowable under certain districts. So
yeah,
just
I'm
like
with
we're doing here,
Yep.
exactly like we're doing here, if we were to change a different district, it's no big deal to change the definition of a bed and breakfast at the same time, just like we're doing here.
But if we were changing the definition every time we did this, I feel like why are we changing the definition all the time? I'd find that being a little bit odd, where
Because we're adding additional allowable uses in certain zoning districts.
specific district changes. That's why I think instead of circumstances, you said district definition. So then I think we're threading the needle a little
I
bit.
think the material point is the governing language that determines
What's allowed, not.
what's
What
allowed, what's
allowable,
not
yeah.
allowed is
In the
done
zoning, right.
in the zoning language. That's what I'm taking away from this discussion. And so as long as, in my opinion, as long as that language is shored up and it's rock solid, which just after going through this looks like it is, I don't know, it seems.
Well, I'm not gonna
seems
die on
reasonable.
this sword, but to say that people don't look at the definition sections, I don't know. Shall we poll the city? Shall we poll attorneys and judges across the country? You know, to say you don't look at, the first thing I did look was, you know, at the definition section, but
But by, it's a function of law, right? What is the governing language that determines whether or not it's allowed, right?
and under law, we can get our attorney here, ambiguity goes against the drafter. And we are the drafter. So if there's an ambiguity between the definition section and the specific zoning provision, I wouldn't want to be on that side of that legal argument.
Well, I'm sympathetic to the need, to the desire to be more specific, but I do think that the general zoning district regulations would control in this situation. And I think like just from a practical perspective, like trying to cite a B&B under just the definition alone, I think you can see how that would quickly run into issues. So I think as drafted, like it accomplishes the purpose. I don't think that there's a major like legal risk of the ambiguity being interpreted in a way that would allow someone to sort of strong arm a B&B into a district. But I am sympathetic to the point that it is a small change. And so I think it's within the planning commission's discretion as to whichever way they want to define it.
Yeah, so when we say the circumstances or whatever, are we talking about more than just the zoning district? Like that has to be a certain number of rooms and things like that. So how much of this are we, I mean, if you think about it, are we gonna pull all of that into this definition as allowed by under the circumstances of the zoning district and the size and the placement, blah, 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 blah. So I think it's basically saying it's not a free-for-all. There are limits. If you want to know what those limits are, read
each
yes.
individual zone.
I'm okay with it.
I do like CJ's recommendation, because David, I agree with you, like, we need that definition with the building and to get all that stuff in there, but I do kind of like trying to thread the needle with what CJ proposed, because again, I know like, I don't necessarily think it would be a very great legal argument, but what we've seen in this city over the last few years is there have been a lot of harassing complaints. So if we can shore up ambiguity and not give anyone any sort of ammunition, I think that that's always a pro. But I like Mark, I won't die on the hill either. It's just, if we have it here in front of us.
I think CJ clears it up.
We could make a simple change to
What
that.
was the word? Instead of circumstances, zoning definition or
Under certain zoning definitions.
under specific zoning.
I think what I heard the first time was along with associated accessory guest buildings allowable under certain or allowable within certain districts. Because then it sort of points to within certain districts, accessory buildings are allowed. And if we don't outright say, they're allowed, then they're not allowed. So R4 allowed, neighborhood marine, not allowed.
Would you say district or just zone?
I think either.
Well,
I think, well, I can leave that one up to,
Well, because we have like.
all districts.
yeah, I would go with
Are they?
district.
Thanks. I thought.
Yeah.
Is it-
So you can even keep the language and do
certain
under
zoning
certain,
district.
under certain circumstances and in certain zones.
Yeah.
Because like Craig brought up too, the certain circumstances also go into the, how many rooms you can have and this and that and this. So I think that's good, but
Sounds good.
I don't know what that.
What did we just agree to?
I don't know what that.
Allowable under certain circumstances within
Yeah, I was-
specified zone.
No, allowable under in certain districts,
Oh, well,
which is what I thought Luke just said.
That's what I thought we landed on, allowable within certain districts.
And then they go to the district to see what the different
Right.
circumstances are that allows them to have it.
Right.
okay.
Nice and complicated.
Thank you, everybody. I have a question for the petitioner. I'm confused as to what's going on at the property itself. I went over there this afternoon trying to find the third building, proposed building, the accessory building. And walked into the parking lot and walked around and found a small house-like building with a black door on it.
Mhm.
My first question is, what is that currently being used for?
To be honest, I don't know. I haven't been briefed on that.
Okay, do you know what building I'm talking about?
I do,
Is that
but
the
I,
garage?
aside from the vague answer of storage, I don't have anything more specific than that.
Thought that was the garage.
I think that was the garage. They were gonna try and put rooms in and redo.
Okay, there's no garage doors there and
Correct.
it looks, it could be just storage. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's what it is. So, I'll take you at that since the petitioner isn't here again. The garage on the Mary Street property
Mhm.
has Trivec now over both garage doors. Looks like they're going to enclose that and make something other than a garage out of it. What do you understand that's going? to
That
be?
I have a little bit more detail about. First of all, the ongoing renovation of 120 Mary in their discussions with the building department, they have come to understand, Wickwood has come to understand that the building department will enforce a commercial building code if 120 Mary is part of a hospitality use with more than 10 total rooms in all buildings. That's their interpretation of the building code. Therefore, if 120 Mary is combined with 510 Butler and becomes part of a hospitality use with more than 10 rooms, a commercial building code will be required for 120 Mary and its accessory building. So they're getting out ahead of that with the enclosure of that accessory building. Now, under this ordinance, if that combination were to occur, the accessory building at 120 Mary would not be permitted to have accessory guest rooms because there are only two buildings could have accessory guest rooms. So the existing accessory building on 510 Butler and the house at 120 Mary would be those two. And that garage, no longer a garage, as you point out, but that accessory building would not be allowed to have guest rooms. The thought process, as I understand it, is in that circumstance, that would become like a game room type building. It would just have amenities for residents in it. And also, just to be honest, Wickwood hasn't finalized their plans yet. They own 120 Mary, they're renovating 120 Mary. What happens after that comes down to whether this gets adopted and some other aspects. It may be that 120 Mary becomes a bed and breakfast on its own, or becomes a short-term rental on its own. And if one of those pathways is chosen, then they will come to the city for the appropriate approvals at that time. I think so to some extent, they are just trying to make sure they have options available, not knowing whether this amendment will go through or not.
You as the representative of Wickwood
Mhm.
is standing here saying that, as you know, as they currently say, they have no intention of doing 3 accessory buildings at any point in the future.
I have been told that the language here is acceptable to Wickwood Inn. So the fact that the limit of 2 buildings, they told me that's acceptable to them.
Thanks.
Which is also why I was saying, to me anyway, I look at this and say, does this work for the R4? Does this work for the city of Sagatuck? Whether it ends up working for the applicant, that's really not my concern. They'll make their decisions based upon whether or not we think this is a good use of or good movement to provide for additional guest rooms within this district.
Whether it complies with our ordinances.
Correct.
I think, you know, I mean, I really looked at this. I have theoretically a problem with us passing an ordinance and to benefit a single property. But I try to look at this, what is the benefit for the entire community?
Right.
And I think there is a definite benefit, given all that we've been talking about with the lack of available rooms, et cetera. We want to increase the availability of tourists to have places to stay, especially right downtown.
Correct.
So I try to pull back from the fact that we have somebody coming in and proposing this for their own particular benefit and say, okay, is this good for the whole community? And I think it is. So I have no reason, I can find no reason not to support the ordinance, which is a double negative, but I will be supporting the ordinance.
Okay. So,
Yeah, I guess I'm still a little hung up on the number of accessory structures, but I'm also at the same time, because I don't know if it's the right number, but at the same time, I don't know if it's the wrong number. So
correct.
I'm not sure that's going to stand in my way for, you know, taking this forward, but
It can always be amended.
Can we?
If,
we look at it again.
yeah, if practicalities came up.
I mean, with
I
having
guess,
the
you know-
2 buildings, you have limited them at least in the size they can be by having no more than 3 rooms, per building, which is, I think was the major intent when we first started talking about it.
But I guess from the last discussions, you brought up a great point. I'm trying to wrap my head around it. There's nothing stopping in our ordinance, the way it's written, or that if we were to adopt this ordinance, 2 accessory structures could be used for lodging, for rooms. More accessory structure, or more structures could be used for other purposes,
They'll still,
subject to the lot coverage
right.
restrictions.
I was gonna say, you still get back to the lot coverage, the setback, all the setback rules, all that would still have to apply. So at some point, they'll be limited with how many different structures you could actually put on a property, but
Just by the coverage and the setbacks.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But there'd be nothing stopping, and I don't think this would be necessarily a bad thing, but then, and I'm just kind of going through hypotheticals in my mind, but then, you could connect an accessory structure to the main unit, and now all of a sudden you're down and put up another accessory structure. Is that a bad thing or a good thing? I don't know, but
Well, if we're talking about, are we talking about accessory structures or accessory guest units? So the accessory guest buildings obviously have a maximum number of bedrooms. So,
which is no more than 50%
yeah,
or
so-
6.
Yeah,
what I'm saying
exactly.
is they could join the 2 together at some point in time and make it
Well-
one.
well, if they had 2 accessory guest buildings and each of them had 3 units in them, they
Yeah,
couldn't
combine
join them together.
Not those, you could join
Could they
one of the
ju- to the
accessory
primary.
structures to the primary structure and then put up another accessory structure.
Currently, I don't think we have a maximum number of bedrooms for B&Bs, so that may well be. But then again, lot coverage will sort of address that. I mean, even the connect, and, our definition, what we consider connections is, it's not easy to do. It's not just sticking a roof between them. There's a lot that goes into it. Yeah, it would be.
Like I say, and I'm not sure that that's even a bad thing, right? I mean,
Right,
it's just
right.
something that could happen, so I'm kind of gaming it through my mind, and what brought it up was the garage being converted, and technically that could
Game
be
room.
joined to one structure or another structure and used to increase space, but again, is
But
that
I
a bad
think-
thing? I don't
Right.
think so.
But the positive is that we have identified a maximum number, of guest dwellings to 2 and no more than 3 rooms in any one structure, and the combined cannot be greater than 50% of the principal building. So yes, if somebody could attach them to the principal building, you'd have more rooms.
And your
But then-
50% number just went
Right.
up,
And this is where we would have to, I think at a later time, come back and kind of decide if this is something we think is a pressing issue. Do we want to amend further the definition of a bed and breakfast to say it's allowable up to X number of rooms in a principal building? And then they would fall in. So if we said it was 10, if that was the case, like the state kind of does, then the 2 accessory buildings that could be allowed going forward for those areas could only have 5.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that that's, based on the conversations, I wouldn't mind seeing us look at that at some future meeting if everybody else thought it was important.
And I'm
to,
not suggesting that we start gaming these scenarios and changing the language. I'm just for my own
Yeah.
benefit, I'm kind of going through some different situations that could come up and trying to think about, is that something we need to be concerned about at some point in
Yeah.
time? Not necessarily now.
Right. Other discussion on this? Bobby,
So
you've
are
been
we-
quiet. Are you in?
Are we clear on what the change people are wanting, like the very specific language? I know we're,
So we've got right now, along with associate accessory guest buildings allowable under certain districts.
Can we approve that today, or do we have to
No, we can approve
Okay.
with,
Subject to the change.
yeah, subject to the change, yeah.
Okay,
sending it to council.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a recommendation for
Yeah.
approval, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Bobby?
I'm in agreement. I appreciate Mark's comments and suggestions as well as Joe's thoughts. But I also am anxious generally and specifically here that we have consistency among our ordinances relative to districts.
So do I.
So, and actually, just coming from my business background, I think, demand drives all of this in the final analysis. So, but from a governance point of view, I just think that if you have districts that allow B and Bs, the ordinances should be the same among them all. So yes, I'll support this, but I also think we should not forget that we need to address that.
I agree with you. I think that's one of the things that it's interesting because even, years ago when Cindy was still here and my first kind of came on his chair, we started talking about going through the entire,
Right.
zoning, all the codes and looking for inconsistencies. And I remember she brought up the bed and breakfast thing at that time because it was like, well, why in these 3 districts was it permitted? And then every place else, it was a special land use. And now, and then if you add this in it's available in the R4, then it becomes like, well, should it be similar in at least the other ones that had,
Right.
or should all of them have it available only through a special land use,
Yeah.
which is,
We should just be consistent.
Yeah.
And in the final analysis, it'll be demand that drives it.
correct.
But I also think this is, and I may be wrong because I don't have a long history here, but I think this is a new idea. This is innovation on the part of Wickwood. And while no one in other districts or even this district may have thought about it, now they will. So we just need to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
In fact, the one comment when I was talking to somebody in the city, a business owner said, well, knowing this town, there will be somebody in some other district who says, gosh, I want this.
Exactly.
And so, but
You don't know, but we should be prepared.
And again, it's something and that's why I look at it, I think, well, would this make sense? If it stays within the lot coverage, if it stays within setbacks, would it make sense if somebody else who is running, a bed and breakfast? And again, now, like Luke and I have talked about, we've got a couple of bed and breakfasts that are grandfathered into R1s. These will not be available because it's not a permitted use, even in an R1. They're
Right.
only grandfathered, into there. So no one can game the system by trying to get around, short-term rental caps or something, in the
Right.
R1. Because I heard somebody else mention that to me and they're like, oh, well, so-and-so, and I'm like, they're an R1 district. It's not even allowed, they're only allowed to have it currently because of it being grandfathered originally.
Right.
If we don't have any other comments, we would entertain a motion, and the motion would be the motion, and basically, we didn't have the draft of it, but I believe, Luke, we were talking, it would be a motion to approve, and then you'd read the whole thing, an ordinance to amend. So
A motion to recommend approval.
recommend approval, right? It would be
With-
all of the stuff that's written there in the bold underneath the ordinance number.
Mr. Chair, I move to recommend approval of an ordinance to amend Title 15, Chapter 154 of the Code of the City of Saugatuck to amend Section 154.005 to revise the definition of bed and breakfast establishment, to amend Section 154.002 paren H and paren 7 and paren to expand on the habitation options of accessory structures, to amend 154.002 paren R and paren to allow bed and breakfast establishments to host guests and accessory guest buildings in the R4. You getting all this, Sarah? R4 City Center Transitional Residential, paren CER and paren zoning district if certain conditions are satisfied, to amend Section 154.025 paren B and paren 4 and paren to allow bed and breakfast establishments as permitted uses when guest rooms are in the principal building, and to amend Section 154.025 paren C and paren to allow bed and breakfast establishments with an accessory guest buildings as special land uses as presented to us, with the change in the definition of bed and breakfast as proposed to change from under certain circumstances to within certain districts.
Second.
Having the motion and having it seconded, we will ask for a roll call, please.
Patrick,
Yes.
Baldwin,
Yes.
Clark,
Yes.
Connor,
Yes.
Yes.
Merrill,
Yes.
and Mann.
Yes.
Thank you, planning commissioners. We appreciate your consideration. Luke will be in touch on the council agenda.
Yep.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for your patience as we were working through this, as well as being able to work with us on the limits. So that concludes old business, which moves us on to the new business. We have one item underneath new business, which is the accessory dwelling unit for 991 Ridgeview Lane. This actually does require a public hearing. So at this time, I will open up the public hearing for 991. And I'll ask the zoning administrator to give us a brief summary.
Yeah, I think you guys are pretty familiar with the accessory dwelling unit requests at this point to be able to gain short-term rental licenses. So we have another one in front of us, 991 Ridgeview Lane. This was a recent build, however, the zoning permit for this was issued in 2021. So it meets all of our standards with regards to the setbacks and the dimensional requirements of accessory dwelling units. It meets all of the standards to gain the accessory dwelling unit rental license or to gain the special land use approval. And so staff recommends approval of the special land use application for 991 Ridgeview Lane.
Very good. This is an opportunity for the applicant. If they would like to say anything, you're welcome to come up and introduce yourself.
I'm Mark Compton. This is my wife, Wonder. I just figured I'd speak and just say, yeah, it's a recent home.
Right.
And, we would want to just add to the community. And, I know we kind of see this as an opportunity to share Saugatuck with people that want to visit and, kind of welcoming them into our home and our property. And I know that we've talked to a number of our neighbors as well, and that I know they all feel good about it in terms of accepting and having the guests come in and respect our community and patronize the businesses. So we'd be open to any questions that you guys did have if there were any thoughts or concerns about it.
I don't have any. I thank you guys for coming in and sitting through the first, 50 minutes of old business. Because many times when an application is this clean, many times the applicant doesn't even show, and we always think, well, they should at least show, at least, say hello to us, if nothing else. So I
It's
do
good to get to
thank you
know
for that.
community faces too. I'm from South Haven, so I just moved up here a couple of years ago, but we're still always trying to get to know the community.
Yes. No, I think it serves good purpose. Any other questions
Yes.
for him?
I'm just confused by, and maybe Luke, you can help with this.
Sure.
Bonus room measurement of 1,815 square feet. However, the total gross finished floor area is roughly 546 feet.
So
Finished area replacing the bonus room, or is there two separate living areas? I guess it wasn't really clear in the drawings either.
hold on.
In gross finished floor area, we remove that staircase area from the square footage as well as the storage area. So it then falls.
Basically,
under-
the parts that wouldn't be rented or occupied by,
So like the
A guest.
garage itself that you park the cars in, right? I think they're,
No, it's above.
it's
Yeah,
above the garage.
but I think they're
There's
including.
stairs that go up, and then you kind of get to a landing, and then you go into the unit. The unit itself is 546 square feet, I believe it was.
546.
Got it.
Yeah,
I
there's
just
like a
wasn't-
little utility room up there that would.
So again, it kind of goes back to that whole thing where somebody else did it once before, where they gave us the full, information. I was like, well, you should actually just put in your application, But
I just, the way I
I
read
guess-
this, that sounded to me
Yeah.
like there might be an 800 square foot bonus room and 546
Oh, no,
square
no.
feet. I was a little confused,
Okay.
but
Oh,
sounds like you repurposed the bonus
Right.
room into 546 square feet. Got it.
yeah,
That's fine.
there you go. Very good. Well, then we'll move on.
Quick question, if I
sorry.
may, and I'm trying to see this. Is there a separate entrance that goes up to the, okay. And
Yes.
is that on the east side?
Yes.
Okay, that's
Yep.
the door I'm seeing?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Very good.
I'm sorry, that's all
No,
I
good
have.
for you, man. That's how it's, when you try to look at it, you try to figure it out from the drawings. Sometimes it is confusing. Thank you. That's to the applicant. At this time, we'll open up for public comments. Again, if you have comments, come up to the microphone or raise your hand online. You would be limiting your comments to 3 minutes and just introduce yourself and give us your address. Seeing no one in the room, looking online. Do not see any hands. Sarah, you don't see any. So that would close the public comments of the public hearing. Since there were no comments, we don't have to go through that. So then Commissioner deliberation.
I'm all for it.
It's good.
Yeah. I will just acknowledge, I know that Brian Elmore and Jeffrey Ham, your neighbors, they sent an email just in support of it, but they did mention if ADUs or occupied homes are exempt from STR caps, licenses should not be included in the total percentage of STR licenses. And just to clarify, that's not the case.
No, that's not the
So,
case.
yeah.
ADUs don't count towards the overall cap.
Exactly, just in case they're
Otherwise, we could
listening.
go over the cap.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say, I think it's very clean. And we also, Luke sent out today to each of us, there was 2 pieces of correspondence that was in favor of their application. And I think it looks clean, so I'm in favor of it. If there's no more deliberation, then on page 20 of the kits
22,
is
39.
22 of 39, I'm sorry, is a sample motion that we would,
I move to approve the special land use request to allow the rental of the attached ADU at 991 Ridgeview Lane based on compliance with the ADU requirements of section 154.022 W, compliance with the ADU rental requirements of section 154.092 J, satisfaction of site plan approval standards of section 151.060, and the positive findings related to the special land use standards of approval in section 154.080 that are documented in the staff memo dated February 14th, 2025.
with a motion and a second, we'll do a roll call.
Patrick,
Yes.
Baldwin.
Yes.
Clark,
Yes.
Scott. Yes. Rushay.
Yes.
Graham.
Yes.
and Bennett.
Yes.
Whatever happened to just so moved, huh?
Well done.
I want to try and outdo
Congratulations.
Mark.
Very nice. Congratulations on the home. It looks good.
I'll reach out.
Wonderful
next
city.
steps, by the way.
So that automatically closed then the public hearing. Communications, as we had mentioned, there was just a couple of correspondences that was sent to each of you. We also had in the packet and some correspondence that related to the whole thing we just recommended earlier was on the bed and breakfast. I'm not aware of other correspondences.
I send them straight through.
Yep, report of officers and committees. We don't have any, which takes us to the final public comments. This can be a public comment on anything that you would like to speak on. If you're in the room, you'd come up to the microphone online, raise your hand. And once again, it would be limited to 3 minutes. State your name and your address. No one is in the room, so do we have anyone online at this time that would like to make a public comment? Seeing none, we'll move past the public comments and we'll move right into commissioners' comments. We will start with our newest commissioner down at this end, Craig.
I hope every meeting is as clean as this one. That's all I have.
Wishful thinking.
Your mouth thing, Ozzy.
Yes.
Well, I'll muddy it up then. There's 2 things that I'd like to kind of get on the agenda going forward, if everyone supports it. One, I think we owe it. We should take a look at this chicken ordinance. I looked through the Douglas one. I think it's pretty clean. It's pretty comparable. I know that we kind of pointed the applicant who was talking about it to city council, and then I watched the city council meeting later and they kind of pointed back to us. I don't think it's fair that we're just pointing at each other and not addressing it. So let's at least put it on an agenda, take a look at it. Second thing I'd like to consider is just looking back over the ADU and either defining what cooking means or taking it out. If people are constructing ADUs, I don't want them to have to build in a whole kitchen if we don't think they need it. So we don't define cooking. So I just don't know, like, does that mean a stove? Do they need to have all these appliances in there? Or can it just be a place to sleep? So those 2 things. But other than that, happy to be here.
Thanks for the report. Lou?
Yes.
That's-
Yeah, I will say, I hate to interrupt, Mark, I'm sorry, that should be included in the packet. That's just me not being up to speed, so I printed it off for you tonight, but it will be in the packet, I promise.
I wasn't like
No, I know, I know.
thanks for the report.
Yeah.
End of period, end of
Just-
statement.
Yes.
Otherwise,
You're welcome.
that's it for me.
Oh, good meeting. Glad to get the changes in for B and B. I think it'll be good for the town. So I know we had a lot of good dialogue and it dragged out a long way, but you know, when you do make changes like this, it's important to change them in the right direction. I think we did. So I want to thank everyone here in the room for doing that. Chickens, yeah, I mean, I agree that we should get an answer, back, whether or not that's something the council obviously is going back and forth and not convinced that there's 100% support there yet, but certainly let's discuss it and get it on the agenda. That's it. That's all I have.
I'll support that as well. I think we should take up the chicken opportunity, chicken or the egg. That's all I have. That's good. Good meeting.
It was a good meeting. And I agree with Austin in terms of both of his recommendations. And I'd also, perhaps at the next meeting, we can talk about tri-community plan and where we're at on that.
Yeah, I do think, because I know tonight, the city of Douglas was doing their
Right.
entire meeting on the city master plan, which they're still looking at, are they going to do a city, and will they also participate in the tri-community? And it's kind of unfortunate that it happens the same time as our meeting.
Holly went, right?
And did she go?
I think she
Okay,
was planning
okay.
on going,
Yeah,
yeah.
because we'd like to, hopefully it'll be recorded in some way, we'd be able to watch it.
Yeah.
Because I'd just be curious to see how they were handling it for that additional meeting, on their side. But I do think we'll have to start getting that on the agenda. On-
Chairman, if I may, the council did meet in a strategy session, and the subject of the master plan came up, and I think it's been labeled as a priority for the council to make sure that we do actually, take a run at updating it this year. And so, you'll find that the council's, in support of
Favor.
that. So.
The other thing I would like to say is I really would urge us all to start looking at this consistency among ordinances and districts. Because we have these feel-good moments and then we go, okay, it's an early evening, we get to go home and have a drink.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with you. Luke and I were just talking about that this week, and when you put things on the agenda to try to address and what are the priorities, for it. But, when we keep mentioning it, even like the commercial
right,
was mentioned all last year, but we had other things that always kept moving it off of the docket. And at some point you have to just make the docket a little longer
right.
and just kind of get through it, so I agree. In closing comments, I think that, what we've done regarding the recommendation to council, for these accessory guest units is a positive for the city. I think when we, the previous mayor, Mayor Stanton, when it was talking about the short-term rental, was very vocal, and so was the whole council, in saying that we'll try to figure out ways that we can bring more guest rooms, into the city to try to offset any reduction in the short term. So I think this is really a positive. And, some people may listen to it and think that we did it for one applicant, but it's really looking at it, does this accomplish a long-term goal and a priority for the city? And so I'm happy that we took our time, and I think we got revisions in here that were different than what was originally proposed to us, which is a positive. So I thank all of you, and, and also the applicant and David and Trent and everybody who's participated in kind of getting us to this point of making that recommendation. And I hope that council looks at it and feels the same way and moves it forward. Regarding the idea of, I heard about the chicken. I think that I've talked with Luke, and if everyone is in favor, I'd like to see in our March or April, just a new business for discussion, where everybody could potentially at least discuss whether or not they think it should be something that we would want to, at least my thought would be to find out what's all the potential hurdles that we may have. Is there a limit on numbers, or looking at the city of Douglas's ordinance and kind of starting there and saying, would this work? But, addressing some of the concerns that may be on cleanliness or noise or, those type of things, and we can kind of lay it out. And if if we think it's something that we would want to entertain, then I would say it would probably behoove us to get a sense from council. Do they want us to spend additional time in trying to draft, changes to our existing ordinances to allow for such a thing? Because I don't think any of us really want to go through and do all the work if we find out that it's really not something that's going to be favorable.
Right.
And I realize, just like with short-term rental, council may say, well, it depends on what you recommend to us, but we have to kind of have a similar agreement. And so I would propose that. I do think the ADU language, needs to be taken a look at some point down the road. We also have to kind of consider if we got really clean ones, again, just the process that we're putting them through, really what's necessary. But since we've got 4 of them out there and another one coming, we don't want to do that until we actually get through and we don't have any additional ones that have already got a special land use in process before you start making that type of recommendation or change. Other than that, the other thing that I think all of us saw, we were going to put in the kit and we forgot was there was the priority set by council, for the city. And so that was, was presented at the council meeting. They also ran an ad in the commercial record, kind of like with the chart, kind of highlighting that. And so that kind of lines up and gives us some guidance also as to what we're doing. But with that, I don't have anything else other than the fact of just saying it's nice to come back and see everybody after missing a month. And I look forward to seeing everybody next month.
So moves to adjourn.
We will move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic.